Hi everyone, I'm Nate Boot. I'm a developer advocate for the OpenSearch Project. I've got with me here Lior Perry and Anurag Gupta. Thanks for joining us, you guys. We're here to talk about a Fluent Bit NGINX integration that they've done to help further our goals of providing more meaning to logs that we've never seen before, providing some contextual information that will allow us in the future to more meaningfully process log information in an automated fashion. So I appreciate you guys coming and sitting with me for a little bit. Let's set the stage for everyone. I touched on it a little bit, but what exact problem are you guys trying to solve by with this integration?
So I'd say that today the concept of modern frameworks and software engineering concerns multiple elements of the software, rather microservices and cloud-related pods. So many moving parts in a modern infrastructure for topology. And taking into consideration that each one can have a different log format, and it's very hard to take these disparate silos and put them in a one coherent view of your application. And to that fact, we wanted to create some meaningful way to represent these diversities in a one fluent and versatile, though exact measure that can reflect your actual use cases and show your status of your application with diverse types of elements that are there, other databases or containers or even services.
Just to kind of add on to it, things are really complicated. At the end of the day, we're trying to make sure software is up and running. And as we're trying to do that, we're dealing with this massive explosion, as Lior said, pods, containers, microservices. So how do we get to some same language that we're speaking?
Sure. So logs aren't a new thing that we've been doing. People have been using logs since Linux has been around. So we're taking this thing that may not have meaning, giving some meaning to it, and then with those kinds of smarts, we're able to just kind of generically provide a common format for those logs so that we know what they mean rather than just an arbitrary set of data.
Yes, exactly. And if you consider the entire picture from the first stage in which the software is operating, then comes the Fluent Bit and the ingestion pipeline that pushes information into the engine, and the engine that has to consolidate and project the observability signals and then allow the user to reflect what's going on in his system and allow maybe even creating thresholds and monitoring on these systems. And as you mentioned, since the logs have evolved early on and each one has its own siloed and its own proprietary format, it's very hard to consolidate them in the end goal and in the stage of the engine itself. So I think this is where the Fluent Bit, for example, as a major contributor for the pushing of information from the agent to the engine itself, has gained some ground.
So what you're saying is that with all these logs that we've had from the dawn of time, it seems like every time you get a new piece of software with its own proprietary log format, you have to teach yourself what those logs actually mean every single time. And so when we combine that with OpenSearch, there's a lot of different ways to store those logs. How is it that you're achieving this integration? How are you providing this common structure that provides meaning, but without actually knowing a whole lot about the log itself?
So I think that part of the collaboration was just to understand what we have in the community today in the infrastructure and what protocols are supported today by both industries and communities. So we have the major part of the observability is the OpenTelemetry protocol, which has a standard of mainly focused on the metrics and the traces. It has some part of the logs, but it doesn't try to cover the entire scope because, as we discussed before, the variety is huge. And this is the point where Fluent Bit comes and helps us to convert the specification of the dedicated format into something that we know how to understand and has a meaningful semantic.
To really add on to that, right, is we have massive amounts of this unstructured data. And also what you were saying earlier, right, we have attempted to make some structure in the past. I think the best example is like Syslog. And multiple RFCs that have been there for the past 20 plus years. So there is some structure that does exist, and we know we can get to it. And I think OpenTelemetry has really started to provide this ability for us to say, let's converge on a set protocol, a set schema, and has done so really well with traces, metrics, and logs, still as, I would say, an evolving sector. And this is where we can borrow from what's been out there over time and as they were saying, get to that really good output for users.
That's interesting. It makes me think of our minds themselves. We're very good at seeing patterns in information. And so with our brains, we can look at logs and get meaning for those. But it sounds like what you're doing is making it possible for some smarts to be coded in as to what's coming in. So with this converged format, OpenSearch will be able to say, hey, this looks just like a web server log, or this looks just like an NGINX specific web server log, or that, this looks like a trace span or something, So there's, with this common format, those many elements and all of the completely divergent log formats that we're seeing are being given an actual place in this converged format.
Exactly. And one thing to mention is that we like to push this compute intense and sometimes heavy amount of logs, not to put that burden on the engine itself. So, for example, if we can move this computation that converges and transforms the original structure into the common structure, give that to the agent, have that responsibility on the agent, and the agent would be schema aware. That would prove very much beneficial so that the ingestion after being transformed is something we are understanding, is compliant, and it can drive the standard of the dashboards and structure that we are fully aware of.
And really, I think that building on what Lior was saying is if you look at just the math of it, if we try to do this all centrally and we're sending more and more data over time, and we look at the benefits of distributed computing, doing this across thousands of different endpoints, thousands of different places that have that room for a little computation, it can tremendously save us that burden. We can then focus on more of the analytics, the alerting, the dashboarding that comes once you have this common schema.
Interesting. Yeah, so it makes sense, when I look at a Kubernetes log, it's completely different. And over time, I had to kind of teach myself what to expect out of there, what the different fields mean. So this sounds like a really powerful development here. Is there something coming in the future that you're kind of working your way up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think with NGINX, we took one of the more popular sources, and we took this schema approach that merges the OTel side, what has been done in the community, some of the more recent announcements, which we will talk about, and said, let's give folks an out-of-the-box experience for that.
Gotcha. And so that's the first time you've mentioned OTel. Is that's integral to your solution?
Yes, that's a key factor that we'd like to present the existing format. We won't want to invent something. Inventing something is just yet another schema. We're not there for it. We like to create the gapping of the existing parts within. We have the OTel, which supports metrics, traces. We have ECS, which supports a very large portion of the logs. And just recently, these days, there was announced that they would be finally converged into one schema that covers everything. I think this is something we've been expecting for quite a while. And the idea behind the simple schema is to mine that gap until there's that final schema that has the entire approach that gives everything a common way of understanding. We will be there, and the simple schema would totally conform to that. But until then, we have this solution that gives us the time to embed and use these technologies.
Gotcha. So you haven't made another competing standard. It makes me think of the
Not
old
at all.
classic joke. But you've created a stopgap to kind of tide us over until we get to the point where these formats are converging.
And when they will be converging, it will be a very important point in which there will be transparency for all these types of different ingestion pipelines and different sources that are being transported into the central engine, and it will be possible, as we just mentioned, to take pre-canned dashboard and queries and just plug them in, and click next, and then we'll have out-of-the-box views of your system. And this is something which is very appealing for many customers.
It's appealing to me too. Whenever I look at a new log format, it seems like I spend more time learning how to diagnose things from the logs than I do actually gathering meaning from the logs. I get, oh, this is broken or some file isn't found. That's meaningful to me, but it's just, it's text. So you're really saving people from having to spin their own brains on having to learn what their logs mean.
Yeah.
Do you have a name for your creation?
We call it integrations.
Okay, no fancy code
Nothing
name
too
or anything.
fancy.
Okay,
Yeah.
And I think this collaboration between us and Fluent Bit is something that we inspired that the community would take as a first step, and would take the idea, the code base, and just, so to say, copy paste and just reuse these concepts for any type of new source. And the capability to create this transformation using the Lua script is very quick, very straightforward. I think it resembles a new phase in which we can create a very fast way to factorize all these capabilities into a large scope of pre-canned dashboards for integrations.
so sorry, go ahead.
Just to even add on to it, it's like everything here is Apache 2 open source, so a user will, and we're almost like some of the first consumers of this new mesh.
It's music to my ears.
And now folks will get to see we're collecting raw logs, we're converting it to this new schema, we're visualizing this new schema, we're alerting on this new schema, and all of these things get unlocked, and you get to see all in the open, build on it, modify it, do whatever you need to make it most effective. NGINX is the first one, but rapidly we have this OpenSearch Con coming up later this year. We'll have a lot more to show there. These integrations that just light up and you can build on, try it out, test it out.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that greatly. So, Lior, you mentioned Lua. That was the first time I've heard that in this conversation. Would you consider Lua a hard thing to take on to help transform the logs if people wanted to contribute, since you've mentioned Apache 2.0 open source?
Yeah, really good question. So it kind of gets into the depths of how does this work under the hood. And Fluent Bit has a couple of things that it allows. The first is what we call parsers. And this is your very typical regex extraction from a log file.
They call it a glob, I think.
Yeah, glob patterns, whatever you may need from that particular text file. The difference that we're doing here, though, is we actually start creating structure, which is nested fields, some things that are correlated with aspects of the host system. And so to build that out, we use one of Fluent Bit's more powerful features, which is that Lua scripting, Lua processing. With the latest version of Fluent Bit, which we released just a day ago, 2.1, we now allow for inline Lua processing, which means that as you ingest the log, instead of it having to go through a separate filter, that same thread can execute and build a structure in the same thread. It's super performant, super fast. And with the NGINX side, you just kind of copy and paste some code. And ideally, we'll build that experience so it's easier. You just say what schema you want, and we can auto detect these things. Still working through that, working for community support, of course. And
as you mentioned, the concept of having a simple way for builders to contribute is something that we're working very hard. We're creating currently a CLI which will allow user very straightforward with user prompt to auto-generate new integrations, and it will simplify and ease the process of creating new integrations, so it will be even easier to collaborate. So you have a very straightforward way to ingest and add more integrations, and this will allow us hopefully to have a substantial amount of resources and services that we just know to integrate out of the box, and give users a large variety of resources that they can just review and inspect, test, and even if they're happy with them, ingest them into their system.
Awesome. So we talked earlier about how some of the existing solutions, the OpenSearch you can use as a log sync, and so you were trying to solve something in the circumstance where people were just kind of throwing everything up as a log processor, and so that may or may not look like some common format, but if you have it all in one index and dynamic mapping is turned on every time a new log format comes up into there, the queries that you use to visualize those have to change because the data is different.
Yeah, exactly. So that the existing notion of how to interpret logs in which you try to throw away everything into one Uber index that represent everything, and it might have multiple fields that has the same semantic meaning. So it's very hard, as you mentioned, to create a query that takes all these different names and extract the real meaning behind it. So it makes perfect sense, and this is why the community is pushing forward very strongly to that notion to have a structure, well-defined structure, semantic structure that everyone will use. All the ingestion pipeline would conform to that, and this will give a very powerful notion to the exploration, to the investigation, the root cause analysis, which is, I think, a key factor in observability use cases.
Interesting. So instead of teaching your mind how to make sense of those logs, if the index were to change with another mapping, you would have to learn the query to get what you want out of those things, and that would have to change just as much as our ability to perceive them with our eyes.
And I think kind of the spoiler for next time, things that I am hearing buzzing in the community is a unified query language that will work on top of the schema. So even the translations or the attempt of adding these new things can be easier. But
interesting. So we're talking about something like a new piped processing language, or a new just to pull something out of a hat there as an example. Tell me more about a unified query language.
Yeah, I think there is no set direction yet, but just still very much under that discussion.
Well, that's something I'll be keeping an eye on, because we pull in a lot of logs, and I can get a listing of the logs, I can read them, I can make sense of what they mean, but if I were to create a dashboard based on those logs, I'd be sitting there. It would take me longer to do that than it would just making sense of them. Yeah. So I'm hearing what you're talking about here, and I'm envisioning an OpenSearch dashboard with a log index using this converged format, and you could just sit back and watch the data come in at your own pace, and it'll say this. Well, I've seen this format before. It looks just like NGINX, so here's your dashboard. Enjoy.
And we're having a call out to the community. We're creating tooling, and we're creating samples, and we're having very large documentation section that we want to have the community collaborate with us and help us. Obviously, that's a part of the basic idea behind it, to allow these simplified usage of dashboard, which is common, which is easy, and which is really drives all your use cases fast forward. So once we have enough examples and good enough CLI and tooling, we'll give the community chance to collaborate in a very simple way and to enhance and enlarge our scope of integrations.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds very promising.
Thank you.
Where do you think you could use the most help from the community? Is it creating the actual formats for various log arrangements, or is it in the transformation with Lua, or if you had to plead for help in one particular area, what do you think you would ask for?
I think that what we've made with KubeCon is a perfect example of how you can utilize existing tools and existing capabilities, dashboards that even user has created, just to take them, to use the scripts that allow to transform to the standard format and just upload them and create an integration from them, and then collaborate with the community and use that integration as part of distribution. And this will really signify the amount of capability that user can interact with these systems.
And I think to add on to it, prioritization. What apps do you want to see? What do you want lit up? Right? We had a user that said, I use NGINX with OpenSearch, and he helped contribute. Ryan from World Tech IT helped contribute to this project by saying, these are things I'm looking for. Let's get a good end-to-end use case. So if you're a user, you see this as a challenge, a problem, there's a Slack channel, there's a discussion forum, multiple ways to just say, we want to see this.
Gotcha.
We're open source, we're GitHub, just far away here.
Yeah, another case of a community-driven projects furthering all of our goals. So we appreciate that from the community at large. Open source, it's wonderful. Do you know anything about dates or timeline, or can you reveal any roadmaps? Do you have a roadmap available?
I think from the Fluent Bit side, because we're leveraging existing code that goes back multiple versions, we don't necessarily have to tie it to a release. Maybe the ease of use and usability can be tied to that, but we can do this iteratively. NGINX, we didn't have to wait for a release. We could just fire it off. So as we get these requests coming in, ideally we iterate on this, and come OpenSearch we have a nice little view of all of the different integrations that we support.
Interesting.
So definitely not something that we have to wait around for a release for. We can jump in.
Value your PRs, folks.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Do you think that this will lead to any kind of automated smarts about one's infrastructure? Because I can see as converged log formats come in, there could probably be some intelligence about, well, there's obviously an NGINX server sitting here, and that's sending up to this OpenSearch, so we know there's an OpenSearch. Do you think you'll be able to, not necessarily AI, but create a common format for things that go together, like for people with Docker and Kubernetes? It'll kind of be able to say, okay, this is what a service map looks like, I think.
That's an excellent question. I think that we emphasize, once we have understanding of the structure and the schema, we can emphasize the correlation, the being able to correlate from an existing threshold being entered, and doing the correlation between the service, what the spans and traces behind that service, and even drill down onto the specific logs that driven that behavior. So this research and investigation drill down makes the experience of the use case much faster, intensively easier, and this what will actually drive the next generation of observability, to be able to do these things at the utmost speed, and even, as you said, somehow to automate this, to create insights from your system.
Have you given any thought to using maybe ML Commons or anything like that to add a little intelligence to it?
That is definitely on our roadmap.
Interesting.
One thing that's fun is on the Fluent Bit side, because open source has gone through all these generative models, there's a lot of stuff where if you ask, hey, can you generate me a schema on this app? That's my custom app. People get fairly close to a good schema. So I think if we get the data in a common format, we are sending it with well-known visualizations, and we're doing well-known alerts, well-known dashboards. There's some really cool things that these generative models, I think, can start to whip up.
Interesting.
To say, oh, I know what's happening here.
Yeah.
And because you put this schema in place, I know what is being affected, what downstream apps are being, here's how to go resolve it. I'll go do it for you. So
Interesting.
It gives you, as you mentioned, it gives you the context, understand the context because it's a well-defined, well-structured. Then it can derive many things that otherwise would have taken you as a developer a substantial amount of time.
I can only imagine all of the expertise that's out there in log analysis. We've all been, over the evolution of logs, we've all looked at logs to try to solve a problem or two. So there's probably, I would bet my sysadmin hat that there's a lot of log expertise, and you would probably find a lot of helpful PRs out there in the general public. So this is your call to action, folks. We need to converge our formats and make our dashboards much more easily available and generative.